Hello? Settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. The year is 1315. Across Europe, the typical rhythms of life are about to be shattered by an unprecedented climatic shift. Imagine standing in the fields of medieval England, the air thick not with the scent of harvest, but with an unseasonable chill. For generations, farmers had relied on predictable seasons. But that year, the late summer sun seemed to vanish, replaced by torrential rains that refused to abate. This wasn't just a bad harvest, it was the harbinger of a profound environmental crisis that would reshape the continent for centuries. Historical climatology, drawing on evidence from ice cores, tree rings, and geological records, confirms the onset of the Great Famine, 1315 to 1317, as the initial devastating blow of the Little Ice Age. Wheat prices, a crucial indicator, soared by over 300% in some regions, documented in medieval chronicles and government records from places like England and France. The incessant rain saturated fields, preventing crops from ripening and leading to widespread blight. Expert analysis by historians like William Chester Jordan in The Great Famine Northern Europe in the early 14th century details how these ecological stressors spiraled into societal collapse. Livestock, essential for both food and labor, perished in droves due to disease exacerbated by the wet conditions and lack of fodder. Parish records reveal a sharp spike in mortality rates, particularly among the poor and vulnerable. This wasn't a slow decline, it was a sudden, biting chill that caught a largely agrarian society utterly unprepared. The immediate impact was food scarcity, but the cascading effects, weakened populations, social unrest, and a profoundly altered relationship with the natural world would define an era of exceptional climatic hardship. The relentless rains of 1315 to 1317, which ushered in an era of unprecedented famine, were not isolated events. Following this initial catastrophic period, the climate settled into a new, colder pattern across northern Europe. Imagine the growing unease in villages as each subsequent winter arrived with sharper winds and heavier snows than the last, and summers consistently failed to deliver dependable warmth. This shift, while gradual to human perception, is meticulously documented through paleoclimatic proxies. Glacier advances in the Alps, studied by glaciologists such as J. M. Grove, show significant growth periods beginning in the early 14th century, pushing into valleys and engulfing farms. Tree ring data from Scandinavia and the Baltic region reveal narrower growth rings, indicative of shorter, poorer growing seasons. These scientific findings corroborate the anecdotal evidence found in contemporary chronicles, which increasingly lament the unusual cold and frozen rivers. While the term Little Ice Age was coined much later, the people of the mid-14th century were undoubtedly experiencing its onset. Fish catches, a vital supplement to the medieval European diet, also began to decline markedly in certain northern waters, suggesting shifts in ocean temperatures and currents. This ecological fingerprint wasn't uniformly distributed. Cooler temperatures first tightened their grip on northern latitudes, particularly Scandinavia, Iceland, and the British Isles, before gradually encompassing much of Europe. Historical records from locations like the Netherlands speak of harbors freezing over with increasing frequency, disrupting trade and fishing, clear evidence of a systemic temperature drop affecting daily life. This persistent chilling effect hinted at a prolonged struggle against an unrelenting natural force, forcing communities to confront a future vastly different from their past. The whispers of the coming cold were growing louder, carrying the undeniable truth of a world undergoing a profound climate transformation. With the pervasive cold came an even more chilling reality: chronic food scarcity. The early 14th century's Great Famine, a direct consequence of climatic shifts, was not an isolated incident, but a brutal precursor to centuries of precarious food supply across Europe. The empty granary wasn't just a metaphor, it was a tangible, recurring threat that cast a long shadow over daily life. Agricultural yields plummeted as growing seasons shortened and unexpected frosts decimated crops. Specifically, data from manorial records in England, analyzed by scholars like B.M.S. Campbell, reveals significant drops in grain productivity during this period, often by 10 to 20% compared to the preceding centuries. Imagine a village where the annual harvest consistently falls short of what's needed to sustain its population until the next year. This wasn't merely belt-tightening, it was a desperate struggle for survival. The traditional staple, wheat, became increasingly difficult to cultivate in many northern and central European regions. This forced a dietary shift towards hardier, less calorically dense crops like oats and rye, or even foraging for wild foods, berries, roots, and bark, a clear sign of extreme distress. This widespread hunger led to profound societal changes. Rates of infanticide and abandonment, though difficult to quantify precisely, are suggested to have risen in famine years, according to some demographic analyses of burial records. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, making populations highly susceptible to disease. When the Black Death arrived in the mid-14th century, it encountered a continent already physically and psychologically weakened by decades of hunger. The empty granaries echo thus reverberated beyond just nutritional deficiency. It contributed to a reduced population size, altered social structures, and fundamentally reshaped the agricultural landscape of Europe, setting the stage for prolonged adaptation and resilience in the face of an unrelenting cold climate. The enduring hunger throughout the Little Ice Age was a direct consequence of a fundamental crisis in agriculture. The harvest's failing promise became a relentless reality for the vast majority of Europeans, locked in a desperate cycle of insufficient yields. Imagine the despair of a farmer watching his fields, once reliable, now succumb to late frosts, relentless rains, or premature snowfalls year after year. This wasn't simply bad luck, it was a systemic environmental challenge. Paleoclimatological data, derived from sources like lakebed sediments and peat bog analyses, confirms a significant decrease in average summer temperatures, particularly in regions vital for European granaries such as northern France, the Holy Roman Empire, and England. This temperature drop shortened the growing season by weeks, fundamentally altering the agricultural calendar that had been stable for centuries. Cereal crops, especially wheat and barley, which require specific heat accumulation to fully ripen, were particularly vulnerable. Historical documents, such as monastic account books and tithe records, show fluctuating but generally declining grain outputs over extended periods, reflecting a sustained agricultural regression. In some regions, vineyards, once thriving in northern France and England, retreated southwards or vanished entirely, illustrating the palpable impact of cooler conditions on sensitive crops. The chronic nature of these agricultural failures pushed communities to their breaking point. Starved populations, already weakened by malnutrition, became highly susceptible to epidemics. The constant threat of a failed harvest also contributed to widespread socio-economic instability. Land values fluctuated wildly, labor shortages became common after plague outbreaks, and peasant uprisings like the Jacquerie in France or the Peasants' Revolt in England often had roots in economic hardship exacerbated by poor harvests. The fields, once symbols of life and sustenance, became arenas of despair, forcing communities to adapt or perish under the unforgiving temper of a changing climate. The despair wrought by failing harvests was compounded by a more fundamental issue, the very composition and health of the soil itself. During the Little Ice Age, the phrase frozen earth, barren womb became a stark reality for communities whose existence depended entirely on agriculture. The soil, once a reliable provider, seemingly turned against them. Beyond the immediate impact of shorter growing seasons and colder temperatures, the climate shift also affected soil dynamics. Increased precipitation, especially in the early phases of the Little Ice Age, led to waterlogging and soil erosion in many areas. Bog landscapes expanded, consuming once arable land, particularly in northern Europe and the British Isles, as documented in archaeological studies of medieval farmsteads. These high water tables suppress soil temperatures, hampering microbial activity essential for nutrient cycling. When combined with consistently cooler summers, the decomposition of organic matter slowed down, diminishing soil fertility over time. This meant that even in years with favorable weather windows, the intrinsic productivity of the land was reduced. Imagine the struggle of medieval farmers, already toiling with rudimentary tools, now facing fields that offered less in return for their immense labor. The cruel rejection was multifaceted. Some lands simply became too wet or cold for viable cultivation, forcing abandonment. Marginal lands, which had been brought into production during previous warm periods, were the first to be discarded, as their limited fertility could not withstand the climatic stress. Research into abandoned medieval villages across regions like the Scottish Highlands, Scandinavia, and parts of Germany provides archaeological evidence of this widespread agricultural retreat. This environmental degradation, often overlooked, was a cornerstone of the famine cycles, intensifying food shortages and forcing populations to adapt their agricultural practices or migrate, profoundly altering the demographic and economic landscape. The very earth beneath their feet dictated the limits of their survival. The struggle against the Little Ice Age was, at its most fundamental level, a struggle waged by individuals against the environment. The farmers' calloused hands, accustomed to the rhythm of seasons, found themselves in a losing battle against the encroaching ice and enduring cold. Daily life became an unrelenting negotiation with a hostile climate. Medieval agricultural techniques, while efficient for their time, were inherently susceptible to drastic climatic alterations. Crop rotation, fallowing, and open field systems were designed for predictable weather patterns, not for persistent cold, increased rainfall, and early frosts. Farmers lacked the scientific understanding of plant pathology or advanced meteorological forecasting, leaving them vulnerable. For instance, the critical period for cereal crops, from flowering to grain filling, was frequently disrupted by unseasonably cold snaps or excessive moisture. Botanical studies of preserved plant remains from archaeological sites indicate a shift towards more cold-resistant grain varieties, such as rye and oats, in regions previously dominated by wheat, highlighting a slow iterative adaptation driven by necessity rather than foresight. Imagine the sheer physical toil, plowing waterlogged fields, battling fungal diseases exacerbated by damp conditions, and harvesting meager crops under threat of early snow. Contemporary art, such as the calendar pages in illuminated manuscripts, like the Très Riche Heures du Duc de Berry, despite their idealized portrayals, occasionally depict colder landscapes and tougher conditions for agricultural laborers, providing visual clues to the changing environment. The constant failure to produce sufficient food led to widespread depopulation of agricultural lands, with estimates suggesting that some regions, particularly in Central Europe and Scandinavia, experienced significant reductions in cultivated acreage. This retreat from arable land reflected the stark reality that farming in many areas simply became unsustainable. It was a prolonged, exhausting fight where sheer human effort alone could not overcome the forces of a global climatic shift, forcing communities to seek alternative strategies for survival. Beyond the fields, another critical lifeblood of medieval Europe, its great rivers, succumbed to the relentless cold. The roar of the frozen river became a familiar yet terrifying sound, transforming vital arteries of commerce and communication into impassable sheets of ice. These once dynamic waterways, now turned to stone, profoundly impacted European societies. Historical records like port tariffs, merchant ledgers, and city chronicles meticulously log the increased frequency and duration of river freezes. The River Thames in London, for instance, famously froze over on multiple occasions during the Little Ice Age, particularly between the 17th and early 19th centuries, leading to the celebrated but economically disruptive frost fairs. While these fairs are often romanticized, they signify complete paralysis of riverine transport. Similarly, the Rhine, the Elbe, and the Seine experience prolonged freezes, sometimes for weeks or even months, hindering the movement of essential goods like grain, coal, and timber. This was not a mere inconvenience. It was an economic chokehold. Transporting bulk goods over land was significantly more expensive and arduous than by water, multiplying costs and exacerbating shortages in towns reliant on river trade. Imagine a city like Cologne or Amsterdam, whose very existence was intertwined with its river, now watching its main artery solidify. The economic ripple effects were severe, contributing to localized famines when food supplies couldn't reach markets, and impacting burgeoning industries that depended on coal or raw materials transported via waterways. Studies by economic historians have demonstrated how these transport disruptions further destabilized economies already strained by agricultural failures and demographic crises. The frozen river became a potent symbol of nature's dominance, turning a source of life and connectivity into a barrier, forcing communities to innovate alternative trade routes and survival strategies against the backdrop of an ever-changing, harsher climate. While frozen rivers crippled traditional trade, they also presented audacious, albeit treacherous, opportunities. Peril on the ice became a lived reality for those who dared to traverse the frozen waterways, transforming them from barriers into temporary risky highways. This adaptation, born of necessity, highlights the human capacity for ingenuity in the face of adversity. With river transport halted, desperate merchants and, crucially, populations needing food or fuel found themselves with a stark choice: immobile isolation or perilous passage over solid ice. Contemporary accounts and local histories from regions bordering major rivers like the Rhine or the Danube describe instances where frozen surfaces supported loaded sledges, horse-drawn carts, and even makeshift marketplaces. The Dutch Schotsenrijden, or ice skating, became not only a popular pastime but also a practical mode of transport, allowing access to isolated communities or faster travel between towns during severe winters. Geological surveys of riverbeds and historical engineering records occasionally reveal features related to ice-breaking or reinforcement efforts, hinting at the human endeavors to manage this frozen landscape. However, the risks were immense. Thin ice claimed countless lives, with reports of travelers, goods, and animals falling through, swallowed by the frigid waters below. Local chronicles often include tragic anecdotes of such accidents, underscoring the constant danger. Imagine a group of merchants carefully testing the thickness of the ice, their breath frosting in the frigid air, before venturing onto the vast, shimmering expanse. The journey was fraught with tension, a gamble against nature's unpredictable temper. Despite the dangers, these perilous ice journeys symbolized a fierce determination to maintain connections and commerce when conventional methods failed. This adaptation, while challenging, demonstrated a crucial link between survival and inventiveness. It showcased how communities, rather than simply succumbing to the cold, actively sought to navigate and even exploit the new environment, fundamentally altering patterns of movement and interaction across the frozen landscape of Europe. As the Little Ice Age tightened its grip, the battle against the cold moved indoors. The fundamental human need for warmth became a driving force, concentrating life around the hearth. In the humble dwellings of medieval Europe, the scent of smoke and shared breath became synonymous with survival, a testament to collective resilience. Archaeological digs of medieval homes across northern and central Europe reveal evolutions in domestic architecture designed for better insulation. Earlier, more open structures gradually gave way to houses with smaller windows, thicker walls, and more sophisticated roofing systems incorporating thatch, turf, or slate, all aimed at retaining heat. The shift from central open hearths, where smoke often billowed freely, to chimneys that better directed smoke out of living spaces improved air quality, though open fires remained a primary heat source. Studies by architectural historians like Matthew Johnson highlight these subtle but critical changes in building practices. Fuel, a constant concern, became a major commodity. Wood, peat, and charcoal were fiercely guarded resources. Deforestation, partially driven by the increased demand for heating and industrial fuel, became a significant environmental issue in many regions during this period, especially around urban centers. Imagine a small, smoke-filled room on a bitter winter night. Family members, perhaps, with their livestock like chickens or even a calf, huddled together for warmth. The body heat generated by living beings was a significant, if unquantified, contributor to domestic heating. This isn't romanticized imagery, it's a practical survival strategy documented in social histories and ethnographic studies of past rural life. The need for warmth fostered closer living conditions, impacting social dynamics and hygiene. While cozy, these environments also contributed to the spread of disease, especially respiratory illnesses, which would have been a significant threat in a weakened population. The instinct to huddle, to seek and share warmth, was not just comforting, it was a fundamental response to a climate that threatened to freeze life itself. Despite architectural adaptations and communal huddling, the struggle for warmth remained a constant and often desperate battle. The hearth, while central to survival, cast a fading glow in the face of dwindling fuel supplies and the relentless exterior cold. Maintaining continuous heat was a monumental task, consuming significant time, labor, and resources. Fuel scarcity became an economic and environmental issue of paramount importance. As populations grew and cold winters persisted, forests around settlements were systematically depleted. Dendrochronological studies analyzing growth rings of ancient trees confirm periods of significant deforestation correlating with intense Little Ice Age phases. In urban areas, the price of firewood and charcoal soared, making warmth a luxury for the poor. Records from cities like London and Paris show rising fuel costs and increased reliance on alternative, less efficient fuels like peat, straw, or even dried animal dung, reflecting the strain on traditional wood resources. The search for fuel often extended further and further from home, exposing individuals to the elements and banditry, adding another layer of peril to daily life. Imagine the exhausting daily routine, foraging for kindling in frozen woods, chopping logs in biting winds, or carefully rationing precious peat. The energy spent simply acquiring fuel detracted from other essential activities, perpetuating the cycle of hardship. Moreover, the efficiency of heating technologies was limited. Open hearths, even with chimneys, lost much of their heat up the flue, while ceramic-tiled stoves, kachelofen, offered greater efficiency. They were expensive and gradually spread from more affluent regions like southern Germany and Bohemia. This unequal access to efficient heating exacerbated social stratification. The need for heat was not merely about comfort, it was intricately linked to food preparation, which required sustained fires for cooking grains and preserving foods. Thus, the hearth's fading glow did not just signify a dip in temperature, but a critical vulnerability in the entire chain of survival, reflecting how deeply intertwined climate, resources, and technology were in determining the fate of communities during this challenging period. Beyond the internal struggles for warmth and food, communities faced external threats from the very air they breathed. The signature of the Little Ice Age was not just persistent cold, but also the howl of the north wind, a relentless icy fury that stripped warmth from bodies, ravaged architecture, and fundamentally reshaped daily outdoor life. Meteorological data, painstakingly reconstructed from historical weather diaries, ship logs, and institutional records, reveals a significant increase in the frequency and intensity of severe winter storms during the colder centuries. These storms often brought heavy snowfalls that isolated communities for weeks, blizzards that trapped travelers, and freezing winds that compounded the chilling effect of low temperatures. Wind chill, though not quantified by medieval observers, was a deadly factor. Exposed flesh could freeze rapidly, and even well-clad individuals struggled against the constant energy drain of combating deep cold. Studies of historical clothing such as those by archaeologists specializing in medieval textiles indicate a greater emphasis on wool, layered garments, and fur-lined apparel designed to trap air for insulation, a direct response to these harsher conditions. Imagine stepping outside your flimsy dwelling into a winter landscape where the wind seems to bite through every layer of clothing, carrying needle-sharp snow. Travel between settlements, always challenging, became a life-threatening endeavor. The average distances covered by daily travel likely decreased, leading to more localized economies and cultural exchanges. The design of architectural features in exposed regions, such as smaller windows facing prevailing winds, or the clustering of buildings for mutual protection, can be seen as implicit adaptations to this environmental pressure. The north wind wasn't merely an uncomfortable element, it was a potent force that could destroy livelihoods, snatch lives, and reinforce the profound isolation many faced during the coldest periods of the Little Ice Age, making every journey outside a calculus of risk and reward. Against the onslaught of brutal winds and biting cold, human habitation during the Little Ice Age proved remarkably fragile. Sheltering from the storm became an ever-present concern, forcing communities to adapt not just their homes, but their very settlement patterns, highlighting the pervasive influence of climate on life. Architectural historians and archaeologists have uncovered significant evidence of climate-driven modifications to housing. In exposed areas, particularly northern Scandinavia, Scotland, and the Alps, there was a noticeable shift towards more compact, lower-profile buildings that offered less surface area for winds to buffet. Homes were often built into hillsides or clustered very closely together for mutual protection against the elements, creating the characteristic clustered village appearance in many regions. Research by experts like Dr. Chris Knuzel on medieval building techniques underscores the development of thicker, double-skinned walls, smaller, often south-facing windows to maximize solar gain while minimizing heat loss, and the widespread use of earth and heavy timber for insulation. These modifications, while labor-intensive, were critical for increasing the thermal efficiency of dwellings. Imagine a small, tightly packed hamlet, its houses leaning into each other, their sturdy walls deflecting the unceasing wind. The collective effort to reinforce and maintain these structures against the ravages of winter storms became a communal activity. The impact extended beyond individual homes. In some marginal highland areas, entire settlements were abandoned. Archaeological surveys of sheilings in Scotland and satyrs in Norway, high-altitude summer pastures, indicate a retreat from these less protected, higher elevation sites, suggesting a forced concentration of permanent settlement in more sheltered valleys. This retreat from marginal lands, driven partly by agricultural decline and partly by the need for more robust shelter, marked a tangible shrinking of the human footprint in some regions. The constant need for shelter from the storm was a daily reminder of humanity's vulnerability, urging innovative design and fostering a shared sense of environmental resilience. Snowfall, once a welcome sight associated with fertile fields, became a symbol of isolation and hardship during the Little Ice Age. The silence of the snow was not merely aesthetic, it was a physical manifestation of a world muffled and transformed, where deep winter conditions stretched for months and mobility was severely restricted. Historical climatological data, compiled from a wealth of sources including ecclesiastical records, chronicles, and even early meteorological observations from the 17th century onwards, clearly indicates a significant increase in both the frequency and volume of snowfall across large parts of Europe. This wasn't just a picturesque dusting. We are talking about multi-meter snowdrifts that could bury entire villages. In some regions, particularly the Alps and parts of Scandinavia, passes that had once been regularly traversable became impassable for extended periods each winter, sometimes for half the year. This effectively isolated mountain communities, forcing them into self-sufficiency and restricting trade and communication. Scholars like Christian Pfister, a leading expert on historical climatology, have meticulously detailed these shifts in snow patterns and their profound societal impacts. Imagine a world blanketed in deep snow, where the familiar sounds of human activity are swallowed by the vast white expanse. Travel became a dangerous undertaking, often requiring snowshoes or skis, technologies that gained prevalence and sophistication in northern regions during this era. Even local movement, such as visiting a neighboring farm, could become perilous. This sustained deep winter fostered changes in human behavior and seasonal rhythms. Communities had to become expert at winterizing their homes, laying in stores, and preparing for long periods of confinement. The profound stillness that accompanied heavy snowfalls was not always peaceful. It often masked the grinding struggle for survival, the knowledge that outside, the very landscape was conspiring against them. The silence of the snow was a constant reminder of the Little Ice Age's transformative power, shaping not just the environment, but the very fabric of human experience and adaptation. The deep snows of the Little Ice Age didn't just mute the world. They created a treacherous landscape that demanded new skills and tools for survival. Navigating the white landscape became a daily challenge, transforming familiar paths into a labyrinth of drifts and shadows, where each journey held inherent risks and required specialized adaptation. Archaeological findings and historical accounts confirm the increased reliance on snow transportation technologies. The development and widespread adoption of skis in Scandinavia and the Alps, evolving from simple wooden planks to more sophisticated designs, are direct responses to the persistent deep snow. Snowshoes, allowing individuals to traverse snowdrifts without sinking, became indispensable in many northern regions. These tools were not just for recreation, they were vital for hunting, foraging, communication between hamlets, and even for trade in areas where rivers froze solid and roads became impassable. Illustrations in contemporary manuscripts and ethnographic records depict individuals on skis and snowshoes, highlighting their integral role in winter mobility. The dangers of navigating this transformed landscape were manifold: frostbite, disorientation in blizzards, avalanches in mountainous regions, and encounters with desperate wildlife. Imagine a lone figure, bundled against the cold, his breath pluming in the frigid air, painstakingly breaking trail through waist-deep snow, guided only by the faintest outline of distant trees. This constant challenge profoundly influenced community structure. Villages needed to be self-sufficient for longer periods, reducing reliance on external trade during winter months. This in turn spurred local crafts, food preservation techniques, and the development of robust community support networks to assist those isolated or in distress. The cumulative effect was a shift towards greater localized resilience and a deeper understanding of the winter environment. Learning to read the snow, understanding its stability, its depths, and its hazards, became an essential survival skill. The white landscape, though beautiful, was a constant adversary, shaping a deeply intertwined relationship between humans and their intensely challenging environment. As the scientific understanding of climatic forces was centuries away, people primarily sought explanations and solace through spiritual means. Faced with devastating crop failures, relentless cold, and widespread illness, communities turned to the divine. The sound of collective prayer, the solemn procession through barren fields, the ritual of the blessing, became a community's poignant plea for mercy. Church records, parish registers, and local chronicles across Europe provide extensive evidence of increased religious observance and appeals to higher powers during the Little Ice Age. Votive offerings, special masses, and processions dedicated to specific saints, believed to offer protection from famine, plague, or bad weather, became increasingly common. For instance, in many German-speaking lands, the Wetterheilige, weather saints, like St. Florian for fire protection or St. Agatha against thunder and lightning, experienced renewed veneration, often with prayers expanded to include protection from frost and hail. The Rogation-Tide processions, ancient Christian rites where the community would walk the boundaries of their fields, praying for a good harvest, took on renewed urgency and deeper communal significance. These rituals were not merely superstitions, they were deeply ingrained social mechanisms for managing communal anxiety and seeking collective action in the face of uncontrollable natural phenomena. Imagine a village gathered in the biting wind, led by their priest, walking slowly around the frozen perimeter of their fields, chanting ancient prayers. Children, adults, and the elderly, their faces etched with worry, all united in a desperate hope for divine intervention. This collective act fostered a sense of solidarity and purpose amidst overwhelming adversity. Anthropological studies on crisis rituals indicate their crucial role in reinforcing social cohesion and providing psychological comfort even when tangible results are absent. While these blessings did not, of course, alter meteorological patterns, they provided a vital framework for psychological survival, a way to express and process communal grief and fear, and a shared narrative that helped bind communities together against the relentless pressures of the Little Ice Age. Their sincerity reflects the profound human need for agency and meaning in a world that often delivered only hardship. In an era devoid of scientific climate understanding, the repeated traumas of famine and cold profoundly shaped the religious landscape of Europe. Faith in the face of frost was not merely a passive act, it was an active coping mechanism, providing psychological refuge and a framework for understanding chaos through the comfort of shared belief. The Little Ice Age coincided with, and arguably accelerated, significant religious transformations, including the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. While theological debates were complex, the lived experience of climatic stress often pushed people toward intensified religiosity. Sermons and religious tracts from the period frequently described climatic calamities as divine punishment for sin or tests of faith, a narrative that provided a sense of order to an otherwise inexplicable series of disasters. The proliferation of devotional practices, pilgrimage, and the construction of new churches or chapels often occurred in response to particularly severe environmental events. For example, records show charitable giving to monasteries and churches increased during famine years, perhaps in an effort to secure divine favor. This wasn't solely about fear, it was also about hope and community ritual. Imagine a darkened church, its stone walls offering scant protection from the winter's chill, yet filled with the warm, resonant voices of a congregation. In the shared space of worship, in the common recitation of prayers, individuals found a powerful sense of belonging and mutual support. This collective belief system offered a vital social glue, helping communities to endure unimaginable suffering. While modern science can explain the geophysical causes of the Little Ice Age, for those living through it, faith was the primary lens through which they interpreted their world. It provided meaning to suffering, offered the promise of ultimate salvation, and, crucially, reinforced the social bonds that were constantly threatened by starvation, disease, and isolation. In the absence of scientific solutions, the shared belief system was a profoundly human and often remarkably effective survival strategy, demonstrating humanity's deep-seated need for narrative and connection amidst chaos. When conventional food sources failed, survival often depended on a return to more primitive methods of sustenance. The fields no longer yielded enough, stores were depleted, and trade was disrupted. In these desperate times, the bitter taste of foraging, roots, bark, and other desperate sustenance became a harsh reality for many. Archaeological analysis of human waste, coprolites, and historical texts, particularly from periods of severe famine, confirm a drastic shift in diet. People resorted to eating foods that were typically consumed only in extreme desperation. This included various wild roots, often fibrous and low in nutritional value. Tree bark, commonly birch or pine, which was ground into a powder and mixed with scarce flour, and wild greens, usually gathered before they were fully mature, often leading to stomach ailments. Botanical and ethnographic studies demonstrate that during periods of crisis, knowledge of wild edible plants, even those considered marginal, became critically important. In 16th and 17th century Scandinavia, for instance, records show extensive use of inner pine bark during periods of crop failure. The nutritional value of many of these emergency foods was minimal, providing bulk but little energy or essential micronutrients. Imagine the gnawing desperation of chewing on gritty, bitter bark, or a handful of unfamiliar roots dug from frozen earth, knowing this was all that stood between you and starvation. This was not a choice, it was a last resort. The consumption of such unconventional foods contributed to widespread malnutrition, leading to visible physical signs like swollen bellies, weakened immune systems, and increased susceptibility to disease. Demographic studies often correlate periods of high famine mortality with these desperate dietary shifts. The bitter taste of these emergency foods was a constant, stark reminder of the Little Ice Age's relentless grip, forcing communities back to the very edge of survival and highlighting the fine line between life and death during these centuries of environmental adversity. The ingenuity of finding sustenance in a barren landscape was a testament to the sheer will to live, even when life offered little comfort. The widespread failure of traditional agriculture during the Little Ice Age forced people to exploit the wild more intensely than ever before. Survival in the wild became a testament to human adaptability, pushing skills in hunting, fishing, and foraging to their limits and fostering innovation in resource management under conditions of extreme scarcity. Evidence from zoo archaeological studies Examining animal bones found in habitation sites indicates a shift in consumption patterns, as domesticated livestock became harder to maintain due to fodder shortages and disease, and wild game became a more critical food source. There was often an increase in wild animal remains. Hunting and trapping techniques, previously supplementary activities, gained renewed importance. However, this increased pressure on wildlife led to localized declines in game populations, creating further challenges. Similarly, fishing, particularly in coastal and inland waters, saw intensified efforts. The development of more efficient fishing techniques and gear, documented in maritime archaeological records, highlights this desperate pursuit of protein. Fish, especially preserved varieties like salted herring or dried cod, became increasingly crucial trade commodities and dietary staples in many regions, compensating for agricultural shortfalls. Imagine the cunning required to set traps in freezing forests, or the endurance demanded to spend hours on an ice-covered lake, hoping for a catch. This was a precarious existence. The knowledge of the local environment, the habits of wild animals, the seasonal availability of wild plants, the subtle signs of fish migration became invaluable. Communities that retained or rediscovered these skills often fared better. This era saw a more systematic approach to gathering wild foods, blurring the lines between subsistence farming and living off the land, similar to how indigenous populations globally adapt to their environment. This forced diversification of food sources and the heightened reliance on natural resources meant communities developed a more intimate, albeit often exploitative, relationship with their surrounding wilderness. This harsh adaptation against scarcity ultimately shaped not only diet, but also land use patterns, demonstrating the remarkable, if sometimes brutal flexibility of human societies when faced with existential threats. Beyond the struggle for food and shelter, the very clothing on people's backs became a critical line of defense against the Little Ice Age's pervasive cold. The incessant effort of the weaver's calloused fingers exemplifies the ingenuity and perseverance required to craft warmth from whatever materials were available, often scraps, against an unforgiving climate. Textile production, already a mainstay of medieval economies, took on heightened importance. Wool, with its superior insulating properties, became particularly valuable. Sheep breeds adaptable to colder climates were favored, and the preparation of wool, from shearing to carding, spinning, and weaving, became a ceaseless process in many households and workshops. Archaeological excavations of medieval dumps and former settlements frequently yield remnants of robust, densely woven fabrics, suggesting a preference for materials providing maximum thermal protection. The quality and thickness of surviving garments from this era, now preserved in museums, attest to the skilled craftsmanship dedicated to creating warm clothing. Historical fashion analyses indicate a trend towards layered clothing, often incorporating undergarments, tunics, cloaks, and head coverings, all designed to trap body heat effectively. Imagine the rhythmic click of the loom or the hum of the spinning wheel, sounding late into the night. It was an essential domestic industry, often performed by women, enabling families to survive. While the wealthy could afford fine furs and imported silks, the majority relied on homespun wool, linen, and hemp. Mending became an art form, and every scrap of usable fabric was cherished and repurposed. Studies of medieval inventories reveal the high value placed on textiles, not just for trade, but as a crucial form of personal capital and protection, against the elements. The constant demand for durable, warm clothing stimulated innovation in textile technologies and fostered a deeper appreciation for the materials that shielded people from the penetrating cold. The weaver's calloused fingers were not simply creating cloth, they were literally weaving the threads of survival, piece by painstaking piece, against the ever-present threat of the Little Ice Age. Their work silently ensured that many could wake to another frosty morning. In the face of relentless cold, the people of the Little Ice Age instinctively mastered a principle of thermal insulation that remains fundamental today: layering. The importance of layering wasn't a fashion trend, it was a survival strategy, a practical, often ingenious, masterclass in cold weather protection evolved over centuries of necessity. Textile research and historical costume analysis reveal a consistent emphasis on multiple layers, particularly made from wool and linen. Inner layers, often linen, were worn closest to the skin to absorb moisture and provide a soft, breathable base. Over this, a series of woolen garments, tunics, jerkins, and coat-hardies provided the primary thermal insulation. Wool's natural crimp traps air, a poor conductor of heat, making it an excellent insulator even when damp. Outer garments such as cloaks, mantles, and hoods, often made from denser wool or even animal hides and furs for the wealthy, served as windbreaks and added another thick layer of warmth. Archaeological finds such as the Thorsberg Moor clothing from Iron Age Europe, while predating the Little Ice Age, provide evidence of early sophisticated layered garments designed for cold. Historical documents, like wills and inventories, frequently list multiple items of clothing, underscoring the value placed on each layer. Imagine preparing for a winter's day not just by choosing one coat, but by meticulously donning several distinct garments, each playing a tactical role against the cold. Legs and feet were similarly protected. Hose, often double-layered or padded, were common, and shoes were frequently lined with straw or wool, and sometimes waterproofed with animal fat. Head coverings, vital for minimizing heat loss, ranged from simple coifs to complex bonnets and hoods, often with additional wraps. This systematic approach to dressing was a direct, pragmatic response to the pervasive cold. It represented a collective, unconscious technological advancement in personal thermoregulation. The ability to add or shed layers also offered adaptability to changing activity levels or fluctuating temperatures, preventing overheating or excessive chilling. For the people of the Little Ice Age, mastery of this seemingly simple concept of layering was a cornerstone of daily survival, a testament to their enduring ingenuity in adapting to some of history's most challenging climatic conditions. The Little Ice Age did more than just freeze rivers and stunt harvests. It fundamentally disrupted the intricate web of European commerce. The merchant's frozen journey became a perilous undertaking, directly leading to goods becoming scarce and prices soaring, reshaping economies and fueling social unrest. The primary arteries of long-distance trade, the major rivers and sea lanes, became increasingly unreliable. As previously discussed, prolonged river freezes paralyzed inland transport. Similarly, harsher winters and increased storm frequency at sea, documented in historical shipping records and shipwreck data, made maritime travel notoriously dangerous and unpredictable. Insurance rates for voyages escalated, and journeys took longer, diminishing the efficacy of trade. Agricultural produce, the backbone of medieval commerce, suffered not only from reduced output, but also from challenges in transportation and preservation in the cold. For example, wine production in Northern Europe declined, while grain that did manage to be harvested often froze or spoiled during transport, leading to immense losses. Imagine a merchant caravan laden with essential goods, stranded for weeks by impassable mountain passes clogged with snow, or a ship confined to port by pack ice. Supply chains, already rudimentary, fractured under the pressure. Market charters and urban guild records from the Little Ice Age period frequently show dramatic fluctuations and sustained increases in the prices of basic commodities: grain, salt, timber, and even luxury goods. For instance, studies on medieval price indices in England and France illustrate spikes directly correlating with documented periods of severe cold and poor harvests. This inflation disproportionately affected the urban poor, who relied entirely on purchased goods, leading to widespread misery and occasionally food riots. The economic instability also created opportunities for ruthless profiteers and black markets, further exacerbating the hardship for ordinary people. The frozen journey became a metaphor for the entire economic system, struggling to adapt to a climate that constantly undermined its foundations, forcing merchants to become more resourceful, communities more isolated, and exacerbating the struggle for survival across the continent. With formal markets frequently disrupted and coin supplies fluctuating, the Little Ice Age economies often reverted to a more fundamental exchange: bartering. The bartering system became a constant, intimate negotiation for survival, highlighting communities' ingenuity in creating informal economic structures when formal ones faltered. During periods of severe scarcity, particularly after widespread crop failures or when trade routes were impassable, hard currency lost some of its purchasing power, especially for basic necessities. Instead, direct exchange of goods and services became prevalent. Historical records from rural areas, particularly legal disputes over debts or tithes, occasionally shed light on these informal exchanges. A barrel of salted fish might be traded for a measure of grain, a woven blanket for a few days of labor, or a locally crafted tool for a share of a hunting catch. Research into local economic histories often identifies these periods of intensified barter, especially within more isolated communities or during winter months. The emergence of truck shops in later periods, where goods rather than wages were exchanged for labor, hints at the lingering prevalence of non-monetary transactions. Imagine a farmer, his last bushel of rye carefully measured, haggling with a fisherman over the quality and quantity of preserved herring needed to feed his family through the winter. These transactions were often highly personalized, built on trust or a precarious balance of power, and dictated by immediate needs rather than abstract market forces. The values of goods became fluid, dependent on acute local scarcity. This informal bartering system, while essential for many, also underscored the fragility of life. It required individuals to possess a diverse range of skills or goods that were valuable to others. Those with nothing to offer in exchange were often left reliant on charity or faced starvation, further exacerbating social divides. The prevalence of bartering illustrates the fundamental human drive to create exchange systems even when traditional economic models collapse, ensuring that resources, however scarce, could still circulate within and between communities, serving as a critical safety net against utter destitution in a challenging Little Ice Age world. Even amidst the relentless hardship of the Little Ice Age, childhood did not cease. Though marked by earlier entry into labor and higher mortality, children found moments of joy and play, their reddened cheeks a testament to the enduring spirit of youth even in a perilous world. Historical documents, including diaries, artistic depictions, and legal records, offer glimpses into the lives of children during this period. While often idealized in later interpretations, paintings by artists like Peter Bruegel the Elder, active during a particularly cold phase of the Little Ice Age, frequently depict children enjoying winter activities, skating on frozen ponds, sledding and playing in the snow. These images, while not photographic, provide crucial visual evidence of children's engagement with their cold environment. Archaeological finds of small, crude toys like dolls or miniature tools further corroborate children's universal need for play. However, these activities were often intertwined with practical skills. Sledding might evolve into carrying firewood, and ice skating, as noted earlier, was a vital form of winter transport. Child labor was pervasive, with children as young as 4 or 5 assisting with household chores, caring for younger siblings, or performing light agricultural tasks. Imagine a group of children bundled in layers of wool, their faces flushed from the cold and exertion, laughing as they slide across a frozen puddle or build a rudimentary snow fort. These moments of play, short-lived as they might be, were crucial for developing resilience and fostering social bonds within communities under immense stress. Children of the Little Ice Age faced a stark reality: high infant mortality rates, a persistent threat of famine, and the constant exposure to harsh elements. Demographic studies show that childhood was perhaps the most vulnerable stage of life, with diseases exacerbated by malnutrition claiming many young lives. Yet within these grim statistics, the impulse to play, to explore, and to connect remained. These seemingly simple acts of play highlight the resilience of the human spirit, even among the youngest members of society, reminding us that life, in all its fragility and beauty, continued to find ways to express itself despite the overwhelming challenges of a world frozen for centuries. Despite the harsh realities and high mortality rates, the resilience of youth during the Little Ice Age is a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for finding joy amidst hardship. Children, often viewed as miniature adults in historical contexts, nevertheless adapted and even thrived in the colder world, showcasing remarkable fortitude. The activities of children, while often practical, were frequently infused with elements of play. For instance, the gathering of firewood, a chore depicted in numerous medieval and early modern illustrations, often involved exploring the woods, perhaps encountering wildlife or building temporary shelters, merging labor with a sense of adventure. Similarly, herding animals in pasture, a common occupation for older children, provided opportunities for imaginative games and social interaction. Children from fishing communities learned early to navigate boats and identify prime fishing spots, skills invaluable to their survival. Anthropological studies on childhood in pre-modern societies emphasize the active, participatory role children played in their communities, even in the face of adversity. This hands-on learning, while demanding, also fostered a deep connection to their environment and a profound practical intelligence. Imagine a group of children, perhaps in a quiet moment, carved out from their duties, sharing stories by the hearth, their imagination sparked by tales of local folklore or miraculous saints. Such moments of shared narrative and communal warmth were crucial for psychological well-being. Despite the constant threat of disease, famine, and the cold, children would form bonds, develop friendships, and find solace in collective games and storytelling. This was not a childhood of innocence and leisure as romanticized later. It was a childhood of responsibility and constant effort, yet woven through it were threads of joy, discovery, and unyielding hope. The ability of these young individuals to find purpose and moments of happiness in such a challenging environment speaks volumes about the human capacity to adapt and persevere. Their resilience was not just individual, it was a collective force that helped to perpetuate communities through centuries of environmental stress, laying the groundwork for future generations. In a world grappling with unprecedented climatic shifts, where written knowledge was limited and formal education rare, the preservation of practical wisdom became paramount. The elders' wisdom, stories of past winters, lessons for survival, was not merely folklore but a vital, orally transmitted curriculum for living through the Little Ice Age. Before the advent of widespread literacy and scientific meteorology, accumulated experience was the most reliable guide. Elders, those who had weathered decades of harsh seasons, held valuable knowledge. This included recognizing subtle environmental cues signifying impending weather changes, understanding the properties of local plants for food or medicine, and recalling specific strategies that had averted disaster in previous famines or cold snaps. Ethnographic studies of communities living in challenging environments reveal similar patterns of intergenerational knowledge transfer. This unwritten science encompassed everything from optimal times for planting and harvesting in shorter growing seasons, to identifying new, resilient crop varieties, to methods of food preservation effective for extended winters, to safe routes across frozen terrain. Imagine a winter evening by the hearth, the flickering firelight illuminating the faces of younger family members as an elder recounts tales of the hungry winter of '47, or the year the rivers froze to their beds. These were not just stories. They were cautionary tales and guides for action, imparting critical information on what to do, and perhaps, more importantly, what not to do. This oral tradition was the community's living memory, its historical archive. It provided a sense of continuity and shared experience, helping to contextualize current hardships within a longer pattern of struggle and eventual recovery. The respect accorded to elders wasn't just for their age, but for their repository of hard-won knowledge, a collective wisdom painstakingly gathered through generations of trial and error. This intergenerational chain of learning was a cornerstone of resilience, allowing communities to adapt to changing conditions and transmit successful survival strategies across the unforgiving centuries of the Little Ice Age. It showed how communities, by valuing and transmitting knowledge, actively shaped their own futures. For peoples living through the Little Ice Age, especially in the long, dark winters, the art of storytelling was far more than entertainment. It was a cornerstone of survival. Passing down knowledge through the oral tradition, particularly during the deep Arctic night that often settled over homes for months, was crucial for preserving the accumulated wisdom necessary to navigate the harsh realities of their world. Anthropological research into pre-literate societies highlights the robustness of oral traditions in transmitting complex information across generations. During the Little Ice Age, lessons on hunting methods, fishing locations, foraging identification, weather prediction based on cloud formations or animal behavior, and even rudimentary medical remedies were embedded within narratives, songs, and proverbs. For instance, in regions like Scandinavia or the Alps, specific legends often contain practical advice on avalanche avoidance or finding safe passage during blizzards disguised within mythical encounters. The sheer duration of the Little Ice Age, spanning centuries, meant that few individuals experienced its entirety. Thus, the collective memory, shared and reinforced through oral narratives, became the primary mechanism for community learning and adaptation, effectively building a communal knowledge base about long-term climate changes and their associated survival challenges. Imagine a family gathered around a crackling fire, the only light casting dancing shadows on the walls and the only warmth combating the outside chill. A grandparent, perhaps, speaks in a low, steady voice, describing a time generations past when a particularly severe winter demanded specific ingenuity to find food, or when a communal effort saved the village from starvation. These stories were not just passive recounting, they were active teaching moments. Children absorbed not only the data, but the emotional weight and cultural values associated with resilience, resourcefulness, and community solidarity. This informal yet highly effective system ensured that solutions to perennial problems, from managing limited resources to constructing winter-proof shelters, were not lost with individual lives, but continually reinforced and adapted by succeeding generations. The oral tradition, therefore, was a dynamic, living archive, empowering communities to face a constantly changing and threatening climate by leveraging the hard-won experiences of their ancestors. Even more devastating than the direct effects of cold and hunger was the insidious consequence of disease. The Little Ice Age created perfect conditions for disease's silent, deadly spread, turning what might have been manageable outbreaks into catastrophic epidemics that decimated populations already weakened by environmental stress. The interconnected drivers of disease were pervasive. Chronic malnutrition, a constant companion of the Little Ice Age, severely compromised immune systems, making people more susceptible to pathogens. The colder climate meant longer periods of indoor confinement, fostering closer contact and facilitating the rapid transmission of airborne diseases among family members and within communities. Poor sanitation, already a challenge in medieval Europe, was exacerbated by frozen water sources and reduced availability of firewood for boiling water. Furthermore, the disruption of trade routes reduced access to diverse food sources and potentially vital medicinal herbs, further stressing already vulnerable populations. Historical demographic studies, using parish records and burial registers, reveal spikes in mortality that far exceeded those directly attributable to starvation alone, pointing to secondary infections and epidemics. For instance, cold and dampness were significant factors in respiratory illnesses like influenza and pneumonia, which exacted a heavy toll, especially on children and the elderly. Imagine the terror of a sudden cough turning into a death rattle, or a fever sweeping through a family packed into a single, unventilated room. These were not isolated incidents, but recurring nightmares throughout the centuries. The Black Death in the mid-14th century, while not directly caused by the Little Ice Age, found a continent already physically and psychologically weakened by the preceding Great Famine, amplifying its catastrophic impact. Subsequent waves of plague and other infectious diseases continued to ravage populations for centuries, often correlating with periods of extreme cold and food scarcity. The constant threat of disease was thus another layer of suffering imposed by the Little Ice Age, making survival a daily gamble against an invisible deadly foe and fundamentally shaping demographic patterns, social structures, and even medical practices of the era. In an age plagued by rampant disease and lacking modern medicine, communities relied on a combination of folk knowledge, spiritual intervention, and practical remedies. The village healer, whether a wise woman, a monastic brother, or a barber surgeon, became a pivotal figure, offering herbs, rituals, and desperate cures against a constant tide of illness. Medical practices during the Little Ice Age were a blend of empirical observation, spiritual beliefs, and the humoral theory inherited from ancient Greece. Herbal remedies formed the backbone of most treatments. Botanical research and ethnomedicine illustrate that knowledge of local plants, their healing properties, preparation methods, and seasonal availability was crucial. For instance, plants rich in vitamin C, like rose hips or scurvy grass, would have been vital in combating scurvy, a common ailment exacerbated by food shortages. Conversely, the colder climate could alter the efficacy or availability of some medicinal plants, forcing healers to adapt. Alongside herbalism, rituals and charms played a significant psychological role, offering comfort and hope in desperate situations. Charms against fever, prayers for healing, and ceremonial cleansings were commonplace, reflecting a worldview where physical and spiritual health were intertwined. Imagine a somber visit to the village healer, a sick child with a hacking cough, a man suffering from frostbite. The healer, with calloused hands and a deep knowledge of local flora and traditions, might prepare a soothing poultice of comfrey for aches, or a bitter concoction of willow bark for fever. This was often the extent of available medical intervention. While some urban centers boasted more advanced physicians, their services were largely inaccessible to the rural poor. The Black Death and subsequent recurring epidemics like influenza and typhus overwhelmed these limited medical capacities. Communities sometimes resorted to desperate, unproven cures or adopted isolation measures, often too late, to contain outbreaks. The village healer, often working in isolation and with limited resources, represented the frontline defense against the devastating impact of disease during the Little Ice Age. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance in the face of widespread suffering, a constant struggle to bring what little comfort and healing they could to a population under siege. Even in the bleakest depths of the Little Ice Age, humanity found reasons to celebrate, to forge connections, and to reaffirm hope. The long, dark winter presented not only challenges, but also a powerful impetus for communal gatherings. The Feast of the Midwinter offered a brief reprieve from hardship, a glimmer of hope that sustained spirits through the darkest months. Historically, midwinter celebrations predate Christianity, marking the longest night and the promise of returning light. During the Little Ice Age, these festivities, such as Christmas, Yule, and Saturnalia-derived traditions, took on amplified significance. They provided a structured and sanctioned occasion for a temporary release from the grinding struggle for survival. Feasting, often on preserved meats, stored grains, and seasonal delicacies like apples and nuts, was a highlight, even if resources were tightly rationed for the rest of the year. Communal halls and homes brimmed with activity, storytelling, games, music, and the sharing of precious warmth and companionship. Historical accounts and medieval iconography often depict these gatherings, emphasizing their importance in maintaining social cohesion. Imagine a village, huddled against the biting cold, finding solace and joy not in abundance, but in the shared experience of light and community. The flicker of candles, the warmth of the roaring fire, and the laughter of children created a vital counterpoint to the relentless exterior cold. These feasts were not simply about food. They were powerful psychological tools. They reinforced social bonds, allowed for the exchange of news and gossip, offered opportunities for brief respite from labor, and, crucially, served as a communal act of defiance against the harshness of the season. They were a symbolic turning point, a collective acknowledgement that, despite the current darkness, the cycle of nature would continue, and the sun would eventually return. This brief explosion of merriment, often fueled by potent ales or ciders, was a vital aspect of survival, reminding people of their shared humanity and the enduring possibility of brighter days. The feast of midwinter was a beacon, however faint, in the long dark tunnel of the Little Ice Age. Beyond individual ingenuity and material adaptations, the ultimate buffer against the Little Ice Age's relentless assaults was the strength of human connection. Community spirit, the willingness to share what little there was, often made the vital difference between survival and starvation, showcasing collaboration as a fundamental human response to crisis. During periods of extreme scarcity, the impulse for mutual aid became deeply entrenched. Manorial records and guild stipulations often reveal systems of communal support, ranging from shared gleaning rights after harvest to charitable provisions for the truly destitute. Religious institutions, in particular, played a crucial role, maintaining almshouses, providing soup kitchens, and organizing relief efforts during famines. While not always sufficient, these institutions represented formalized acts of community solidarity. Neighbors commonly assisted each other with labor, sharing tools, or providing temporary shelter. This informal social safety net was paramount, as state-funded social welfare systems were largely absent or nascent during much of the Little Ice Age. Anthropological studies on resilience in communities underscore the critical role of social capital, trust, reciprocity, and shared norms in navigating prolonged crises. Imagine a harsh winter's night, a family's meager woodpile dwindling. A knock on the door, and a neighbor offers a precious armload of kindling or a small measure of grain, knowing that one day the favor might be returned. These small acts of generosity, often born of shared hardship, built and reinforced the intricate web of reciprocity that defined medieval village life. Such interdependence was not a luxury, it was a matter of life and death, particularly for widows, the infirm, and orphan children who had little recourse otherwise. The sharing of resources, however small, helped to distribute the burden of scarcity, preventing complete collapse for individual households. This collective spirit, often reinforced through communal labor, religious rites, and social gatherings, forged resilient bonds within villages and towns. It highlights that while the Little Ice Age presented immense individual challenges, it was often through the sustained power of community that people found the strength, the resources, and the will to survive, demonstrating that human empathy and shared struggle are as powerful as any physical adaptation in enduring centuries of environmental adversity. The Little Ice Age's grip extended far beyond agricultural lands and rivers, reaching the bustling maritime centers that powered Europe's burgeoning global trade. The frozen ports, ships trapped, trade strangled, became a recurring nightmare, profoundly reshaping naval architecture, commerce, and international relations. Historical records, particularly port customs ledgers, merchant correspondence, and city annals, provide detailed evidence of increasingly frequent and prolonged freezing events in major European harbors. The Baltic Sea and its associated ports like Lübeck, Danzig, and Riga often froze solid for months. The North Sea ports, including those in the Netherlands and along the German Bight, also experienced significant ice formation, sometimes extending for miles offshore. Even the English Channel and the Thames froze over more frequently than in previous centuries. While the iconic frost fairs on the Thames are a well-known example, they also represent a complete cessation of normal river traffic. This cessation of maritime activity was not merely an inconvenience, it had catastrophic economic consequences. Supply chains, particularly for bulk goods like grain, timber, and fish, were severely disrupted. Imagine dozens of merchant ships, their sails furled, standing silently locked in an embrace of unyielding ice, unable to load or unload their vital cargoes. For port cities, this meant an immediate halt to income from customs duties, reduced employment for dock workers, and shortages of essential commodities. Studies by economic historians highlight the volatility of prices for imported goods in these periods, sometimes increasing by 50 to 100% during prolonged freezes. The strategic implications were also significant as naval movements were hampered, altering military and political calculations. This sustained pressure led to innovations. Merchant ships were designed for greater resilience in icy conditions, and desperate measures, like employing large numbers of laborers to physically chop channels through harbor ice, became common. The phenomenon of frozen ports was a stark illustration of how the Little Ice Age impacted not just subsistence, but the very engines of economic growth and international connectivity, forcing societies to adapt their maritime strategies or face severe economic contraction. The widespread freezing of rivers and ports throughout Europe during the Little Ice Age led to more than just economic hardship. It cultivated a pervasive sense of isolation. Isolation's embrace, a world cut off by ice, reshaped demographics, fostered regional identities, and forced communities into a self-reliance previously unimaginable. Geographical studies of medieval and early modern settlement patterns reveal a retreat from previously marginal, exposed areas. Coastal communities, particularly those in higher latitudes like Scandinavia, Greenland, and Iceland, experienced severe disruption. The Norse settlements in Greenland, for example, which thrived during the medieval warm period, were gradually abandoned during the Little Ice Age, a process driven by a combination of declining temperatures, agricultural failures, and, crucially, the freezing of sea lanes that cut off crucial supplies and communication with Europe. Similarly, in remote inland areas, heavy and prolonged snowfalls made roads impassable for months, turning small villages into microcosms, dependent entirely on their immediate surroundings. Riverine communities, like those along the Rhine, which typically relied heavily on the seasonal flow of goods and people, experienced forced periods of sustained isolation during extended freezes, impacting everything from news dissemination to marital alliances. Imagine a coastal village in winter, its harbor frozen solid, no ships arriving or departing for weeks on end. The outside world shrinks to rumors and whispers, the familiar sounds of gulls and waves replaced by the stark silence of ice. This isolation, while challenging, also fostered a unique resilience. Communities learned to become highly self-sufficient, relying on local resources and internal social networks. Inventories from households in isolated regions frequently list extensive provisions for winter, preserved foods, spun textiles, and a diverse range of tools for repair and maintenance. This period indirectly contributed to the strengthening of regional dialects, cultural practices, and local administrative structures as external influences diminished. While trade adapted by shifting to overland routes that were less vulnerable to ice but more expensive, the direct consequence for many ordinary people was a smaller, more insular world. The ice, therefore, acted as a powerful natural border, enforcing isolation, but also inadvertently strengthening local bonds and highlighting the profound impact of geography on human existence when altered by climate. Beyond the scientific data and the human adaptations to the Little Ice Age lies its profound impact on artistic expression. Painters, particularly in Northern Europe, captured the prolonged winter landscape, their palette often dominated by shades of gray, white, and a pervasive sense of despair, offering a unique visual record of the era's environmental shift. Art historians and climate scientists have increasingly collaborated to interpret landscape painting from the 16th to 19th centuries as primary sources of climate information. Dutch and Flemish masters, in particular, created a distinctive genre of winter landscapes. Artists like Hendrik Averkamp, Winter Landscape with Ice Skaters, and Peter Bruegel the Elder, The Hunters in the Snow, painted numerous scenes depicting frozen canals, ice-bound rivers, and snow-covered villages. These weren't isolated commissions. The demand for winter scenes surged during periods of particularly harsh cold, suggesting that they resonated deeply with contemporary experience. The prevalence of these motifs, compared to earlier periods where winter was less frequently depicted or given less prominence, is a significant indicator of changing environmental conditions. While artistic license certainly played a role, the sheer volume and atmospheric consistency of these works lend credence to their depiction of a colder reality. The colors used by these artists were often subdued, dominated by a cool, muted palette of grays, whites, and blues, reflecting the omnipresent snow and overcast skies. Imagine standing before Averkamp's canvases, the low leaden sky, figures huddled against the biting wind, the flat, unending expanse of ice. It's a visual record of a changed world. These paintings capture more than just weather. They convey a mood, a feeling of desolation and hardship, mirroring the societal struggles. The small, often anonymous figures toiling or enjoying fleeting moments of recreation signify the human element wrestling with the powerful forces of nature. The despair isn't overtly sentimental, but subtly woven into the vast, indifferent landscapes. This artistic genre provides an invaluable cultural lens through which to understand the lived experience of the Little Ice Age, showcasing how climate change permeated not just daily survival, but also the collective human imagination and its subsequent artistic representation, allowing future generations to see the cold through the eyes of those who endured it. Despite the pervasive hardship and the bleak palette often employed, art during the Little Ice Age was not solely a chronicle of despair. Instead, it frequently served as a celebration of human resilience, capturing beauty amidst the bleakness and reminding viewers of shared pleasures and communal life, even in the coldest times. While the winter landscape genre clearly depicted the environmental reality, these paintings often highlighted human activity within that challenging setting. Figures skating, sledding, or engaged in winter sports, as seen in many works by the Dutch masters, were not just markers of the cold, but also images of joyful human interaction. These depictions suggest that while winter imposed significant difficulties, it also fostered unique forms of recreation and community bonding. The vibrancy of the tiny figures, even in vast, muted landscapes, emphasizes the enduring spirit of human life against nature's grandeur. Furthermore, still life paintings from the period, particularly in the Netherlands, became incredibly popular, often featuring opulent arrays of food, flowers, and objects that symbolized both the bounty desired and the domestic comforts cherished during long winter months. These works, while perhaps not directly climate-related in subject, offered a psychological escape and an aspirational vision of warmth, plenty, and controlled interior spaces, all highly valued against the backdrop of an austere outside world. Imagine a meticulously detailed still life, a glistening herring, fresh bread, a half-peeled lemon, all arranged with exquisite care. For the viewer, in a cold, often hungry world, such an image offered a powerful sensory experience, a momentary escape. This art provided psychological comfort, a means of expressing cultural values, and a visual affirmation of human persistence. It fostered a sense of shared experience, showcasing how communities found ways to adapt, to enjoy, and to celebrate life, however fleetingly, during prolonged periods of cold. The art of the Little Ice Age, therefore, is not merely a record of geophysical changes, it is a profound exploration of the human condition, demonstrating that even when confronted with profound environmental adversity, the desire for beauty, joy, and connection remains an undefeatable aspect of the human spirit. It's a testament to how even the most challenging circumstances can inspire creativity and an enduring celebration of life. As the Little Ice Age wore on, the changing climate demanded more than just seasonal adjustments. It spurred fundamental architectural innovations. The architect's ingenuity, building for survival, adapting to the cold, transformed European dwellings and urban planning, showcasing practical responses to pressing environmental challenges. Evidence from archaeological sites and historical building surveys across northern and central Europe reveals a distinct shift in construction practices. Homes became more compact, with smaller footprints and lower ceilings designed to retain heat more efficiently. Windows, previously larger to admit light, often shrunk in size, were shuttered or became double-paned with leaded glass to reduce heat loss. The orientation of buildings also became more strategic, with living spaces often facing south to maximize winter sun exposure. In regions like Scandinavia and the alpine areas, the use of thick stone, turf, or extensive timbers provided better insulation. Central chimneys replaced earlier open hearths, directing smoke out more efficiently, while simultaneously providing more centralized heating, a feature that became increasingly common by the late medieval and early modern periods. Architectural historians, such as those studying vernacular architecture, trace these changes as a direct response to a colder climate. Imagine a traditional timber-framed house, its external walls now daubed with a thicker plaster, its windows noticeably smaller and deeply recessed to combat drafts. In some areas, houses were semi-underground or built into hillsides, cleverly utilizing the insulating properties of the earth. Urban planning also reflected this adaptation. Courtyard houses, common in Renaissance and Baroque cities, offered sheltered outdoor spaces protected from prevailing winds. The clustering of buildings, creating narrow, winding streets in many medieval towns, served a similar purpose, reducing wind exposure and heat loss for individual structures. These seemingly minor modifications accumulated over generations represented a significant sustained investment in climate adaptation. These architectural responses to the Little Ice Age were not accidental. They were the result of centuries of trial and error, reflecting a deep practical understanding of environmental factors applied to the built environment. This ingenuity ultimately contributed to greater human resilience, enabling populations to endure prolonged periods of extreme cold within more thermally efficient and protective structures. The modifications to European dwellings in response to the Little Ice Age were more than just stylistic changes. They represented enduring innovations in insulation, laying the groundwork for cold weather housing design that persists even today. The cumulative effect of these centuries of adaptation left a lasting architectural legacy. One of the most significant developments was the widespread adoption and improvement of the chimney and fireplace system. While rudimentary hearths existed earlier, the Little Ice Age saw the fireplace evolve into a much more efficient heat delivery mechanism, often integrated into the wall structure, drawing smoke effectively while radiating more heat into the room. Beyond this, the materials themselves became critical. Earth-rammed walls, wattle and daub with thicker clay mixes, and later brick construction were increasingly favored for their thermal mass properties, the ability to absorb and slowly release heat. In many northern regions, a notable shift involved incorporating livestock directly into the dwelling, not just for protection, but for their body heat, a practice evident in the longhouse typology, which adapted over centuries to increasingly severe conditions. The construction of insulated attic spaces also became more common, trapping a layer of air to prevent heat loss through the roof. Imagine entering a farmhouse from the 17th century, the low ceilings, the narrow windows, carefully caulked with straw or moss, the thick walls that absorb the day's heat and slowly radiate it through the bitter night. This is the enduring legacy of cold weather housing. The advent of ceramic-tiled stoves or Kachelofen from regions like Germany and Bohemia represented a major leap in heating efficiency, showcasing how technological innovation was driven by climatic necessity. They allowed for slow, sustained heat release from a relatively small amount of fuel, contrasting sharply with the voracious appetite of an open fireplace. These design principles, minimizing exposed surface area, maximizing thermal mass, controlling drafts, and layering materials, were refined through generations of trial and error under constant climatic pressure. The houses that stand today in many parts of Europe, with their compact forms and robust construction, are silent testaments to the Little Ice Age's profound and lasting impact on how humans build for survival against the cold. After centuries of persistent cold, Europe began to experience a gradual, almost imperceptible shift. The hard edges of winter started to soften, and the extended deep freezes became less frequent. This was the first thaw, the smell of damp earth, the promise of spring, signaling the slow retreat of the Little Ice Age. Paleoclimatological data, particularly from ice cores in Greenland and tree ring chronologies across Europe, indicates a general warming trend beginning around the mid-19th century following the coldest period of the Little Ice Age, often identified with the Maunder minimum, late 17th century, and Dalton minimum, early 19th century, solar cycles. While the complete mechanisms of this warming are complex, involving factors beyond solar activity such as volcanic quiescence and eventually anthropogenic influence, for the people experiencing it, the change manifested as more reliable spring thaws and longer growing seasons. Glacier recession in the Alps, meticulously documented since the 1850s, offers clear, visible evidence of this warming phase. Navigational records show reduced instances of frozen harbors and rivers, and agricultural output began to stabilize and increase, a clear reversal of centuries of decline. Imagine a late March morning, the sun feeling stronger on your face already, and the ground, still firm, now yields slightly underfoot, releasing the earthy scent of thawing soil. The once silent world of snowmelt begins with the gentle gurgle of streams swollen by runoff, transforming into the rushing roar of rivers breaking free from ice. This return of liquid water wasn't just a sensory experience, it heralded the return of life. Farmers could plant earlier with greater confidence. Merchants could rely on open waterways for extended periods, revitalizing trade. The psychological impact of consistently milder winters and more predictable springs would have been profound, slowly eroding the collective memory of relentless cold, ingrained over generations. The promise of spring was more than just a seasonal shift. It was a promise of renewed potential, of a world less hostile, allowing human efforts to once again yield more abundant returns. This first thaw marked a pivotal moment, not just in climate history, but in the long, arduous journey of human adaptation and recovery. As the climate warmed and the relentless grip of winter loosened, a collective sigh of relief swept across Europe. This was the long-awaited release, a period of reflection following centuries of climatic stress, marking not just a meteorological shift, but a profound transformation in societal outlook and development. The gradual end of the Little Ice Age, largely concluded by the mid-19th century, ushered in an era of greater agricultural stability and economic growth. Growing seasons lengthened, new lands considered marginal during the cold period could be brought back into cultivation, and overall food security improved significantly. This environmental boon coincided with and undoubtedly contributed to the agricultural and industrial revolutions that redefined Europe. Improved harvests freed up labor from the fields, driving urbanization and providing a healthier, more numerous workforce for nascent factories. Demographically, the end of the Little Ice Age witnessed sustained population growth, contrasting sharply with the intermittent declines and plateaus of the colder centuries. The increased regularity of trade routes further bolstered economic recovery, fostering greater connectivity and wealth accumulation. Imagine a generation experiencing winters that are consistently milder, springs that are predictable, and harvests that year after year deliver consistent abundance. The chronic anxiety over survival, deeply ingrained in the collective psyche, would slowly begin to recede. While the memory of past hardships lingered in folklore and proverbs, the lived reality was one of increasing comfort and opportunity. This period of respite allowed for a shift in focus away from mere subsistence towards innovation, exploration, and cultural flourishing. The adaptations forged during the Little Ice Age, from resilient housing to diversified diets and robust community networks, proved to be an invaluable legacy, contributing to the strength and adaptability of European societies as they moved into a new era. The reflection after the Ice Age was not just about recalling past struggles, but understanding how those struggles had forged a more resilient, innovative, and interconnected continent, forever changed by its long winter. The Little Ice Age, a climatic anomaly lasting for centuries, was far more than just a period of colder weather. Its echoes of the past resonate deeply, revealing how this protracted environmental crisis fundamentally shaped Europe's demography, economy, culture, and even its geopolitical trajectory, leaving an indelible mark on the continent. Demographically, the Little Ice Age contributed to significant population pressures, especially through increased mortality due to famine and disease. While the Black Death was a primary driver of population decline in the 14th century, the repeated cycles of food scarcity and illness during the Little Ice Age continually checked growth and often forced resettlement from marginal lands. Economically, it spurred innovation in agriculture, encouraging the cultivation of hardier crops like potatoes after their introduction from the Americas, and prompting the development of more efficient farming methods. It also fostered the growth of trade networks for essential goods, leading to the sophisticated banking and insurance systems of later eras. Culturally, the pervasive cold influenced everything from art and literature to social customs and religious practices, embedding winter as a powerful, often formidable motif in the European psyche. Urban planning, housing architecture, and even clothing fashions adapted to the colder climate, creating a tangible legacy visible today. Imagine looking at a historical map of Europe and understanding that the distribution of certain crop types, the density of settlements in valleys versus highlands, or the very structure of centuries-old farmhouses are all silent testaments to an era of climatic adversity. The need for fuel led to deforestation in some areas and the development of coal mining in others, kickstarting an early phase of industrialization. The struggle for resources likely exacerbated conflicts, contributing to periods of warfare across the continent. While we celebrate ingenuity and resilience, it's crucial to acknowledge the immense human cost. The Little Ice Age wasn't just a backdrop, it was an active force, a challenging tutor that shaped the modern world by forcing adaptation, fostering innovation, and embedding a deep-seated caution and resourcefulness into the European character. Its lessons, often learned through extreme suffering, remain relevant as we face our own climatic uncertainties. The story of the Little Ice Age is ultimately a story of tenacious survival. The centuries of unrelenting cold provided harsh, yet invaluable, lessons from the chill, demonstrating the profound capacity for resilience, adaptation, and the enduring strength of the human spirit when confronted by existential environmental challenges. Humans adapted on virtually every level, agriculturally by selecting hardier crops and employing new farming strategies, architecturally by designing more energy-efficient homes and communities, economically by developing new trade routes and more robust financial instruments, socially by strengthening community bonds and mutual aid systems, and psychologically through art, religion, and the oral transmission of hard-won knowledge. The development of new transport methods for ice, improved food preservation techniques, and the emphasis on layered clothing all speak to a ceaseless push for ingenuity. This prolonged period of environmental stress did not lead to collapse. Rather, it forged a more robust, resourceful, and interconnected European society. For example, the very pressures of food scarcity led to a greater integration of the America's potato into the European diet, profoundly increasing food security after the Little Ice Age's end. Imagine a continent, hardened by centuries of struggle, emerging into a warmer era with new skills, new technologies, and a profound collective memory of overcoming adversity. The ingenuity born of desperation during the Little Ice Age became the foundation for future progress, contributing to the very resilience that allowed Europe to later flourish and lead global exploration and innovation. This historical episode serves as a powerful reminder. Climate change, whether natural or anthropogenic, is a profound societal disruptor, but the human capacity to adapt, innovate, and rebuild in its wake is equally profound. The story of survival during the Little Ice Age is not just a tale of the past. It is a timeless narrative, offering insights into human endurance and the vital role of collective action in the face of daunting environmental shifts. It reminds us that while nature can be unyielding, the human spirit, when tested, often reveals an awe-inspiring, enduring strength.